one of the other things that is interesting in this has to do with, as I was pointing out before, the Geneva summit that Joe Biden went to. Well, at some point, Trump and Putin are going to meet. I mean, they have both said that they wanted to meet. I would imagine this meeting at some point is going to take place. Whether it takes place in 100 days, whether it takes place sooner, who knows, but it's going to take place. How, given the Minsk agreements, given the Istanbul agreements, given even going out to something like the JCPOA or the nuclear agreements that they got rid of in regards between Russia and the United States, meaning the U.S. scrapped all of these agreements and have shown no propensity to maintain any kind of deal that they set. So how, regardless of any kind of meeting that Donald Trump has with Putin, how does this end? And how does this end in a way where Russia is assured that Ukraine remains neutral, Ukraine is not a part of NATO, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, with the other conditions of ensuring the Russian population is maintained, all of their denazifying Ukraine, not building up a military on whatever's left of Ukraine. Like how do you come to some kind of deal and agreement considering all of the other agreements that were scuttled? I guess I'm asking, how do you actually end this war?
I mean, that's a great question. I will tell you, again, I can't speak on behalf of Russia, but I've talked to enough Russians at enough levels to have an idea of their approach. I mean, we've seen it himself. Putin has talked about, each president coming in wanting to do something different, wanting to do something new. And then, at the end of the day, the men with the dark suits and the briefcases come in and brief them on the reality, and they're stuck. The problem with that Putin scenario, which is not a wrong one, is that this isn't Trump's first rodeo. Okay, he's been in the Oval Office when the men in the dark suits come in with the dark ties and the briefcases and read reality, and he understands that he recognizes that they're the problem. That's the speech he gave in September in Texas. The problem, the biggest threat to the United States is the United States by implementing these bad policies. Yep. So the men in the dark suits aren't going to be coming into his office this time. They're not welcome. He doesn't need them. He's done this before, and he's going to do it his way. One of the things, again, watching The Apprentice, I don't mean to do this to you guys, but as an intelligence officer, it's my job to try and figure out, thought patterns and behavioral patterns, et cetera. I do the same thing when I evaluate other leaders. The Apprentice is a very telling, expose on how Donald Trump operates. And, he creates competitive environments and to get a winner and a loser. He would get these corporate teams together and they would compete. But the best part of the show is when he brings the losing team in and they dissect why they lost. And Trump starts asking very specific questions. The man ain't stupid. And it shows that he has ability to dissect defeat and learn from it. His first administration was a defeat. He didn't get what he wanted. And I believe Trump has dissected that internally and learned from it and is putting together a new team. Like you want in The Apprentice, a new team to come in and do this stuff. So I think right there you have a vehicle for change that the Russians may not have recognized yet. Because I'll tell you, when Anatoly Antonov was the ambassador here, I had the honor and privilege to meet with him a couple times and over lunch and stuff and have meaningful conversations. We talked about negotiation because he was the START treaty negotiator, New START treaty. He sat down across from Rose Gutemuller and was lied to by the United States. The big thing was that the Russian goal was to blend the New START treaty, strategic arms limitations and reductions, with ballistic missile defense. And that's the Russian goal. And the United States under Obama said, you got to separate the two. Remember the famous or infamous scene in South Korea where Obama and Medvedev were each other, and Obama off mic, thought he was off mic. He said, "Hey, I got an election coming up.
Yeah,
get through the election, and I'll remember that. Yeah, and Medvedev went, "Well, you're a sincere man. I believe you." He was lied to. Obama lied to him. Then they lied to him. We had no intention of having flexible on missile defense. What Obama wanted to do is solidify the Strategic Arms Reduction Treaty because it was in the strategic advantage because we lied in the negotiations about how to demobilize B-52s and Trident submarines. We lied because the goal was temporarily demobilized, but in the times of crisis, you could reverse that and get your numbers up quickly. And the Russians didn't realize that the Americans were disingenuous until after the treaty was in. They're looking at it going, that's not really demobilized. That isn't demilitarized. All you have to do is connect that wire and you're back up. You're supposed to pour concrete into this thing. All you did is put a lock on it. How does that? And the Americans are like, no. The treaty is not specific in this. And the Russians were like, I remember talking to Anatoly Antonov, and he went, we were too trusting on the intentions of the United States, that we believed that the United States was sincerely looking for mutually, basically a treaty that affected each side mutually. But what it turned into is a treaty that the United States was seeking strategic advantage over the Russians. And then they kept out the missile defense part. And I remember when Anatoly Antonov said, okay, so we did the treaty based upon what the United States wanted. And then I waited, and then I picked up the phone call, and I called Rose, and I said, I'm ready. We're ready to begin the negotiation. I have a team ready to go to Geneva to talk. And she went, that ain't going to happen. And that's when he realized that the United States is a bunch of liars. Now, but what he said is, we can't live in a world where we don't negotiate with the United States. And all of our negotiations have to end, to be valid, have to end in a treaty, in writing.
Right.
He said, so we know this. We know that even though the United States has this horrible track record, to move forward in peace, there has to be treaties in writing. He said, we are going to make sure that these treaties contain everything we need. We'll be unyielding on this. We will, create mechanisms that aren't just about verification, but also mechanisms that tie the Americans in, that make it hard for the Americans to withdraw. So they recognize this. But the other thing that is to their advantage, all these agreements that were nullified, how many of them were Donald Trump's agreements?
None that I'm aware of.
And Donald Trump always starts, it's, again, part of his psychology, man. I've been following the guy. These were bad deals. These are bad deals because they were bad negotiators. You've heard him say it over and over again. He just said it right there. This was a bad negotiation. This was a bad deal. That's the reality. Trump's coming in saying, I'm not those guys. I'm Donald Trump. I'm a good negotiator. We're going to negotiate a good deal. And once I negotiate a deal, I stick with the deal because it's a good deal. You only go against the deals when they're bad deals, but I'm going to negotiate a good deal. So we'll see. I do think that there's a window of opportunity here because Trump is something new. And you see the way that Putin speaks about him. Putin, it's so obvious it should be obvious, but Trump wins the election. And instead of being pragmatic and everything, Putin's like, the way that man took a bullet in Butler, Pennsylvania. My God, he went to the ground, he came up, and I looked at him, and he was full of strength. And that Trump's sitting there going, more, baby, more. Oh, yeah, that feels good. Because, and Putin's doing it on purpose. He's basically saying this is a good guy, a man of honor, a man we could possibly work with. We could, as opposed to, senile old Joe Biden, who's a liar. And that's the thing, too, that Joe Biden, we get back to Geneva. Joe Biden straight out lied to Vladimir Putin, straight out lied to him. The biggest thing he lied about was wanting peace. Vladimir Putin told Joe Biden, and you recall this, that Minsk was a big deal. Putin was trying to pressure Biden to say, you have to take action on Minsk. And Biden promised Putin, you were there, you know this, he said, I will instruct Tony Blinken to get Minsk back on track. This is going to be our priority. Because Putin said, you want the troops to stop moving along the border in Russian territory, so it's really none of your business. But if you want that to stop, then Minsk will solve it all. The interesting thing is, while the Russians were continually meeting with the Germans and the French afterwards saying, hey, have you gotten that call from Blinken yet? Did Tony call you? Tony's supposed to give you a call and tell you something. And they're all like, no, we haven't gotten a call. Blinken just admitted in September that he was secretly transferring weapons to Ukraine. So at a time when Blinken is supposed to be working on Minsk and all that, he knows that they have no intention of doing Minsk, that it was a lie, and he begins the secret transfer of weaponry to Ukraine because they know there's going to be a war. They know it. They know that they're not going to do what they promised to do to prevent a war so that there will be a war. And the Russians picked up on that in October. They confronted the French and the Germans about Minsk. We're told we're not going to pressure the Ukrainians. So Russia just jumped out of Minsk. In September, Russia puts the 2 draft treaties forward saying, okay, Minsk is dead. This is the new framework. Forget about Minsk. There's no Minsk 3. This is the new framework. And NATO and the United States ignored it. And now we have the war. Why? They wanted the war all along. This is the question that you started out with. The United States and NATO wanted this war all along. It is a necessary action to achieve the strategic vision of bringing down Russia, which is the goal number one. And Trump is going to have to address that. Trump is going to have to show the Russians that that is no longer the policy of the United States. The Russians have said, and Anatoly Antonov, how can we talk to you? What is the basis of our discussion? Jamal, if you and I are neighbors, and I said, look, they say, Scott, what do you want? I want Jamal out of his house. I want him out. I want him in the streets. I want him homeless.
That's and let's negotiate from there. Yeah.
And Jamal, what do you want? I want to live in peace and live in peace and harmony with my neighbors. All right, let's sit down at a table and negotiate.
There's no negotiation on that.
There's no negotiation. You're going to sit there and go, no, he's not willing to bid on this. And so the Russians are saying, wait a minute. So you've articulated that your objective is the strategic defeat of Russia. And I just want to remind people what strategic defeat of Russia means. It means that Russia is destroyed economically. And again, for everybody out here, let me just put it in human terms. That means you don't have a job. It means you don't feed your family. That means that you don't have it. Your life is over as you know it. And then that leads to societal collapse. Now, America hasn't had societal collapse since the Great Depression. Well, we had some inner cities, I guess we could say there's societal collapse in Appalachia. Okay, so we have isolated incidents of societal collapse. But the fact is, our society hasn't gone straight to hell. Russia has. They remember what the 1990s was. That was societal collapse. And we want that to happen again. That's our goal and objective, to bring Russia down to the worst period of its history since World War II, where millions of people died. Americans don't realize that. Millions of people died of alcoholism, suicide, of disease, of drug abuse, of just, the life expectancy rate plummeted because life became meaningless in Russia. That's what we want today when we say societal collapse and political collapse. We not just don't want Putin down, we want Russia broken apart. That is the objective. We don't want this great Russian Federation. We want it broken apart into individual constituencies that then we can use the divide and conquer technique to keep them all weak. That's what we want. That's our objective. That's the CIA's mission. And Trump wants to sit down with the Russians, and the Russians going, yeah, but the CIA works for you, don't they? Oh, yeah. Their mission's still to bring us down. Yeah, we are worried about that, because if that's their mission, that means you've told them that's still their mission. And we can't negotiate with you until you change that. And that's the reality. That's why they won't negotiate. Biden keeps saying, well, we want to meet with the Russians to talk about strategic weapons and arms control. And the Russians are like, no. You want the strategic defeat, so we're not going to talk about the one thing that guarantees you will never defeat us, which is our strategic nuclear deterrence. That's there. You'll never defeat us, because if you do, we kill you all. So no, we're not negotiating that away. And so there's no talks. And the Russians won't talk with Biden. If Trump wants to have this talk, he's going to have to address the issue of the American objective of strategically defeating Russia.
Two last questions, Scott, before I let you go. One has to do with the Greenland thing. People have been talking about this. I've been fascinated by this, because whether he can accomplish it or not is almost secondary to the point of what is in his mind in talking about this. And I think part of this is this kind of recognition of the world is different. Like that, China by itself has like 3 times our industrial potential. You look at Russia, it is a major military power at this point that have shown itself to be strong enough to push back on the entirety of NATO. I think it's a certain level of insecurity, but I want to get your take. This is Trump talking about the Greenland thing.
Well, we need Greenland for national security purposes. I've been told that for a long time, long before I even ran. I mean, people have been talking about it for a long time. You have approximately 45,000 people there. People really don't even know if Denmark has any legal right to it. But if they do, they should give it up because we need it for national security. That's for the free world. I'm talking about protecting the free world. You look at, you don't even need binoculars. You look outside, you have China ships all over the place. You have Russian ships all over the place. We're not letting that happen. We're not letting it happen.
Give me your take on that. I know this, a play for the Arctic, and those type of things, but what is your thought on this? I mean, like I said, whether you can get Greenland or not is almost secondary to the point. What do you think is in his mind on this topic?
I think Donald Trump is very much interested in creating Fortress America, an exclusive. It's interesting to hear this because this is his mind. This is sort of Russia. Russia's saying, "Hey, we have this thing called the near abroad, the former Soviet republics, and we have a very important national security interest to keep the near abroad sort of close to us. It's about national security, and that's been rejected by the West. No, you can't do that. These are sovereign states. This whole thing.
Spheres of influence, yeah.
But Trump is about American national security interests, and that's interesting that he recognizes there's a need that we have interests that are outside of our borders that must go our way, or our national security is compromised. When you talk about Greenland, we have Thule Air Force Base there that has historically served a Cold War purpose. It's linked to a series of early warning stations, radar stations that protect us from ballistic missile attack from Russia. Not protect us, but allow early detection, things of that nature. But that again, these are relics of the Cold War. We now have overhead capability that does that job and maybe even does it better. The big thing about Greenland right now is the climate change that's taking place and the opening up of the Arctic now as a region for economic exploitation. There's a lot of minerals up there, rare earth minerals and exotics and things that can be, extracted from the ground. But then who controls it? You get the Northwest Passage and all this, the movement of ships. He's talking about ships. If Russia can move ships from, the Murmansk all the way across into Vladivostok and down the Pacific, draw that line and look how short that passage is compared to how they had traditionally have to go through the Suez Canal and around. Russia controls that, and it works the other way. And China wants to be a part of that too. Now look at the map and look where Greenland is in relationship to the Arctic Circle, the Arctic Sea, et cetera. And you see that Greenland is perhaps the most strategic territory for influencing development in the Arctic. And Trump says we can't trust that with Denmark. We need it ourselves. We need to be in control of this. And and then people say, well, how dare he? Well, here's the interesting thing. Even the Danish acknowledged that the people of Greenland have a right to select their own future. And there is a contingency in Denmark that allows for not just autonomy, but independence of these people if they have a referendum, if they vote in this direction. So Trump doesn't have to militarily occupy Denmark. All he has to do is go in and tell these 45,000 voters, life will be so much better under America than it is, because there's a lot of resentment in Greenland towards the Danish government. They view that it doesn't have their best interests in mind. I think there's a real shot that Trump's going to come in and we're going to own Greenland by the time his presidency's done. I give it about 100% certainty that's going to happen.
You think so?
Yeah.
You think so? I am.
Even hear the softening of the Danish position now. The Danish were, over my dead body. Trump's like, okay. Well, I mean, what we meant was that we want to work with the population there. Trump's like, yeah, we're working with them too, better than you. But what we meant, there has to be a way. There's a softening of the position. And Europe is, we're going to go to war over this. Really? You're going to go to war? I mean, the French foreign minister talking about war with America. It's like, in what wet dream, excuse my language, do you possibly think that's going to come out well for France? All America, here's the reality for Europe. I'm just going to give it to them in a heartbeat. we talk about how strong China is economically, et cetera. America can shut Europe off with a flick of the switch. Okay, we own your economies. We are your economies. Your economies don't work without us, and we can outlast you in every way, shape, and form. We can just pick you to die individually, or we can kill you collectively. I'm not bragging about this. There's people like, look, Scott's become such a capitalist warmonger. No, I'm just telling you the reality, and we now have a president in place who understands this reality. He doesn't back down. He doesn't believe in a sacred unity between us. He doesn't go to Europe and weep tears because of the cultural unity between two. He goes to Europe and you see it when NATO got together.
Humiliation.
I'm America. We push people away. That's Trump's approach. This is a new game, guys. This guy's coming in with a whole new mindset, and he doesn't view Europe as the long-lasting ally. You're the adversary. And the more the idiots in Europe say this stupidity, because again, Trump is a counter-puncher. So they're sitting there saying, France, well, Trump's response isn't to go, oh, well, let me sit down and consider your words carefully and see if we can come up. Trump's like, really? Boom. How you like that? Yeah, you want to do it again? That's Trump's approach. So if I were the Europeans, I'd be very careful, because Trump is ready to pull the plug on NATO today and watch the European Union collapse. He's not here to preserve the European Union, and he's definitely not here to preserve NATO, and he doesn't give a damn what anybody in Europe thinks, except maybe Giorgia Meloni.
She's got. I love that woman. I love that woman. Last question. 5% for NATO. So this feels like a mob boss to me, where the guy's like, he realizes how weak Europe is. I mean, because if you think about it, when Europe is paying the 2% for NATO, well, that money is coming for weapons for us. When we blew up Nord Stream and they had to buy all that oil or gas from us, again, that's them paying 5 times more to us. Those businesses that were being deindustrialized, they came to the United States. So it's like Europe has allowed itself for a huge amount of money to be flowing out of Europe into the US, which shows a certain level of weakness. And then Trump turns around and says, okay, now I want 5% for NATO, which they can't afford. So what is the point? Yeah, it's a shakedown. So why the shakedown all of a sudden? Is it just to humiliate Europe further? What's the purpose of this?
Well, Trump will have political pushback here in the United States about NATO. And so what Trump is going to do is create the conditions that NATO can't succeed, and then confront Congress and say, this is a dying body. It's on life support. I'm pulling the plug. I'm not going to sit here and pay medical bills for this this dead body. They're brain dead. It's time to say goodbye. And the way you do that is you confront NATO with the reality that the only reason why NATO is militarily viable today is because of American money.
That's right.
And if you turn to NATO and you say, nah, we're pulling back, you've got to step up, 5%. There's not a major NATO economy that can pull that off. Germany can't. Their last defense budget was shrinking. They couldn't even match inflation in terms of this. So their military is shrinking. France, the same thing. England, it's a joke. So NATO can't do this. And the second that happens, you're going to see rebellion within the different ranks. If AFD does well in this election in February, that's a game changer right there. That's the beginning of the end for not just NATO but Europe, because they're honest about it. They say we don't want any of this nonsense. We don't want Ukraine. We want to get back to Russian gas, cheap energy, that makes our economy viable. This is the reality of Europe. It's moving in that direction as the political and economic elites that got them in this horrible situation, who sold their souls to America a long time ago, are now coming face to face with the fact that there's a new sheriff in town and he doesn't want to play that game. And they don't have a plan B. So it's be interesting. Europe is going to be an interesting story over the course of the next couple of years.
Those governments are going to collapse. I guess my thing is, why wouldn't, for the longest time, America has wanted this kind of power projection device in Europe, this kind of American way of controlling European economic politics. And if you think about it, it's even controlling their domestic politics, not just their foreign policy. So why wouldn't Trump want that ability to control Europe in this way, even if it's not in the context of the Ukraine war?
Trump's rejecting the underlying premise of all that, which is the empowerment of NATO. To empower NATO, you need a compliant Europe. To get NATO to do the bidding of the United States, Europe has to be a compliant singularity. That's what the European Union's job is to break down anybody who might protest against what America's trying to do.
Right.
But it's a policy designed to feed a strategy that is linked to the military industrial complex and the need for forever wars to generate. Trump wants to break that. Trump has said, I don't want to do forever wars. That's not my model anymore. I'm not going to let the military industrial complex dictate what happens abroad. I want to pull back. I don't want to be the world's policeman. I want to engage economically with the economic lead, not the military lead. So it's a whole different paradigm right now under Donald Trump. And unfortunately, Jamal, I have to run. I have,
I'm sorry. I kept you long. I just wanted to get that last one in. Thank you, man. I really appreciate this, Scott. I'm sorry for keeping you this long.
No. It was a pleasure talking. I just have certain realities that are staring at me right now that I have to go deal with.
No, I do. I totally appreciate it. I thank you. I always appreciate your time, man. Thank you for this, Scott.
Thank you.
The one and only Scott Ritter. He's a UN weapons inspector